The air in the downtown soup kitchen was thick with the savory scent of simmering minestrone and the low, constant hum of conversation. Eleanor Anna Sterling, known to everyone here simply as Anna, tied her apron tighter and smiled at Maria, the kitchen's manager. Her hands, accustomed to the delicate pages of rare books at the city library where she worked, were just as comfortable gripping the heavy ladle she used to fill bowl after bowl. Here, amidst the clatter of trays and the quiet gratitude of the city's forgotten, Anna felt a sense of purpose that eluded her everywhere else. This was her sanctuary, funded secretly by the immense fortune her parents had left her, a truth she guarded more closely than any other. "You're a lifesaver, Anna," Maria said, wiping a stray bead of sweat from her brow. "We wouldn't be able to handle the lunch rush without you." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Anna replied, her voice warm and genuine. She handed a steaming bowl to a man with weary eyes, who gave her a grateful nod. This was real. This mattered. It was a world away from the one she was scheduled to enter in just a few hours. Later that evening, the sleek black door of a German luxury sedan opened for her. Mark Harrington, her fiancé, leaned over from the driver's seat, his handsome face creased with a familiar, indulgent smile. "Ready to go, sweetheart? Mom and Dad are dying to see you." "I'm ready," she said, smoothing down the simple navy dress she'd chosen. It was elegant but understated, a fact that never failed to draw a subtle sigh from Mark. "You look lovely," he said, his eyes doing a quick, almost imperceptible scan. Simple, classic, very you. It was meant as a compliment, but it landed like a gentle classification, boxing her into a role she was expected to play. As he pulled the car into the flow of evening traffic, he glanced at her. "Long day at your charity project?" Anna stiffened slightly. "It's not a project, Mark. It's a soup kitchen. And yes, it was busy." "I just worry about you, that's all," he continued, his tone smooth as silk. "All that grime. You have to be careful, but I know how much your little hobby means to you." A hobby? Like collecting stamps or knitting. He saw her life's most meaningful work as a quaint pastime, a temporary diversion before she fully assimilated into the Harrington dynasty. She stayed quiet, watching the glittering city lights slide past the window. She had kept her identity as the head of the E.A. Sterling Foundation a secret for a reason. Her parents had taught her that wealth was a tool for service, not a badge for status. They would have despised the world the Harringtons inhabited, a world where a person's worth was measured by their portfolio and their charity was measured by the publicity it generated. Anna had hoped Mark was different, that beneath the polished veneer of his upbringing lay a man who could understand her. With each passing day, that hope was wearing dangerously thin. As they turned onto the long, winding driveway of his family's estate, she felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She was leaving her world behind and entering the gilded cage. The Harrington estate was less a home and more a monument to wealth. Marble floors gleamed under the light of crystal chandeliers that dripped from the vaulted ceilings like frozen waterfalls. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. Anna clutched her small purse, feeling like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into an aviary of peacocks. Richard Harrington, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes, greeted them with a firm handshake for Mark and a perfunctory peck on the cheek for her. "Anna, lovely to see you," he said, his gaze already drifting over her shoulder to a more important guest. Cynthia Harrington, however, made a show of enveloping Anna in a cloud of Chanel No. 5. "Anna, darling!" she exclaimed, her voice a theatrical trill. "That dress is so modest. You must let me take you shopping. We need to get you a wardrobe befitting a Harrington bride." Anna forced a smile. "Thank you, Cynthia. You're too kind." The party was a blur of air kisses and condescending questions. "A librarian? How quaint," one woman remarked. "And you volunteer? That's so noble of you," another said, her tone implying it was also deeply strange. Anna navigated the conversations with practiced politeness, but inside, she was building a wall, brick by painful brick. Mark stayed by her side, but he offered no defense. He seemed to bask in his family's world, oblivious to how it was slowly suffocating her. The breaking point arrived with the dessert course. They were seated at a large circular table with some of the city's most influential figures. Cynthia, holding a glass of champagne, tapped it lightly with her diamond-encrusted nail to get the table's attention. "We were just talking about the future," she announced, her smile wide and predatory, as she looked directly at Anna. "And I was telling Mark that once they're married, I do hope Anna will have the good sense to quit playing with the poor at that soup kitchen. It's a lovely sentiment, of course, but it could be so embarrassing for the family's image, you understand?" The air crackled with a sudden sharp silence. Every eye at the table turned to Anna, whose face felt hot with humiliation. She looked to Mark, praying he would defend her, that he would finally choose her over them. He just laughed. It was a light, careless sound that shattered what was left of her heart. "Mom's right, of course," he said, patting Anna's hand as if she were a pouting child. "It's a sweet hobby, but it's time to focus on more important things. Right, darling?" The world around Anna went quiet. The chattering voices, the clinking of crystal, it all faded into a dull roar. In that moment, she saw everything with a chilling clarity. This wasn't just a difference in lifestyle. It was a fundamental chasm in their values, their souls. They saw her compassion as a stain to be removed. And Mark, the man she thought she loved, had just handed them the bleach. She kept a polite, frozen smile on her face. But inside, a quiet resolve, as cold and hard as steel, began to form. The cage was no longer just gilded, it was armed. Anna said her goodbyes with a grace that betrayed none of the tempest raging within her. She allowed Mark to walk her to her car, which she'd insisted on driving herself, enduring his patronizing pats on the arm and his oblivious chatter about the party's success. The moment she was alone, the mask of placid acceptance crumbled. She drove not to the cozy apartment Mark believed was all she could afford, but to her real home, a spacious private penthouse overlooking the city, a place he knew nothing about. Inside, the silence was a balm. The apartment was her true self, filled not with gaudy trinkets, but with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable furniture, and art that spoke to her soul. She walked to the velvet-lined box on her dresser and took off the 5-carat diamond engagement ring. It felt foreign and heavy, a glittering manacle. She placed it carefully inside the box and closed the lid with a soft final click. It was over. Sinking into an armchair, she let the full weight of the evening wash over her. It wasn't just the humiliation, it was the profound sense of betrayal. Mark hadn't just failed to defend her, he had actively joined her mockers. He didn't love her, he loved the idea of her. A simple, unassuming girl he could elevate and mold into the perfect silent accessory for his life of privilege. Her gaze fell on a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was of her parents, standing in a dusty village in South America, their faces beaming as they stood before a newly built schoolhouse. South America. They had been killed when their small plane went down during a medical supply mission when Anna was just 18. They had left her their vast fortune, but their true legacy was the lesson they had drilled into her from childhood. Wealth is a responsibility, a tool to be wielded for the good of others, never for personal aggrandizement. The E.A. Sterling Foundation was her tribute to them, a silent continuation of their life's work. The Harringtons, with their callous disregard for anyone outside their gilded circle, were the antithesis of everything her parents stood for. And she, by loving Mark, had almost betrayed that legacy. The hurt began to recede, replaced by something colder and more powerful. It was the quiet, unshakable resolve of a person who knew exactly what they had to do. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about holding a mirror up to the Harringtons and showing them the true face of power, not the loud, gaudy power of inherited money, but the quiet, relentless power of principle. She stood up, her movements now filled with a calm purpose. She walked to her desk, picked up a secure encrypted phone, and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice even and firm. "It's Eleanor Sterling." There was a pause on the other end. "Miss Sterling, is everything all right?" "Everything is perfectly clear," Anna replied, her eyes catching the reflection of the city's lights in the dark window. "Regarding our ongoing acquisition strategy for Harrington Global, I want to accelerate the timeline. I want controlling interest. Move on them, Mr. Davies. Move on them now." The next Monday morning, the atmosphere inside the top-floor executive suite of Harrington Global was thick with a toxic cocktail of panic and disbelief. Richard Harrington slammed his fist on the polished mahogany of his desk, scattering a stack of financial reports. His face, usually a mask of controlled authority, was a blotchy, furious red. "What do you mean you don't know who they are?" he roared at his son Mark, who stood before him looking pale and useless. "Dad, I've had the whole team on it all weekend," Mark stammered, wringing his hands. "The E.A. Sterling Foundation. It's like a ghost. It was registered a decade ago, but it's operated in total anonymity. Its funding is a black hole, untraceable. All we know is that as of Friday's closing bell, it had quietly acquired a 40% stake in us. They launched a tender offer this morning for another 15%. It's a full-blown hostile takeover." Richard sank into his high-backed leather chair, a low groan escaping his lips. For 30 years, he had been the apex predator in the city's corporate jungle. He was the one who did the acquiring, the dismantling, the devouring. To be on the receiving end of such a swift, merciless attack was not just a financial threat, it was a deep personal insult. "This has to be a rival," Richard mused, his mind racing through a list of competitors. "Thompson? No, he doesn't have the liquidity. It must be an overseas player, someone trying to get a foothold in the American market. Our brokers say the buying patterns are purely domestic," Mark added, his voice thin. "Whoever this Sterling is, they've been planning this for months, maybe years. The moves are too precise, too strategic. They're exploiting every weakness, every over-leveraged asset we have." The intercom on Richard's desk buzzed. "Sir, the board members are calling on every line. The stock has dropped 22% since the market opened." Richard waved a dismissive hand. He and Mark were keenly aware of something the board wasn't: the creative accounting they had been practicing for years. They had been funneling corporate funds through their own Harrington Family Charitable Fund, a slush fund used for personal expenses and propping up failing side ventures, all while claiming massive tax breaks. A hostile takeover meant a new owner. A new owner meant new auditors meant exposure, and exposure meant ruin. "There must be a way to fight back," Mark said, a desperate edge to his voice. "A poison pill? We find out who this Sterling person is and we make them a better offer." Richard scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You think this is about money? An entity this powerful, this secretive? They don't want a payout. They want the company. They want to gut us." He stared out the window at the city that had once felt like his kingdom, now feeling like the walls of a trap closing in. For the first time in his life, Richard Harrington was not the hunter. He was the prey, and the predator at his gates was silent, patient, and utterly terrifying. The week that followed was a slow-motion demolition of the Harrington empire. Every defensive maneuver Richard and his team of high-priced lawyers attempted was countered with chilling efficiency. They tried to rally shareholders, but the E.A. Sterling Foundation's offer was too generous to refuse, and faith in Harrington leadership was plummeting. They tried to initiate a white knight merger with a friendly company, but potential partners backed away, spooked by the sheer ferocity and financial might of the anonymous aggressor. The foundation, it seemed, had infinite resources and flawless strategy. The pressure began to fracture the family's polished facade. Dinners at the estate became tense, silent affairs. Cynthia, who had once flitted through life on a cloud of blissful ignorance, was now a bundle of nerves, her theatrical charm replaced by a shrill anxiety. "Richard, you have to do something," she pleaded one evening, twisting a silk napkin in her hands. "Our friends are starting to whisper. Margaret Blevins asked me if we were having financial difficulties." "Everything is under control," Richard snapped, though his face told a different story. Mark, meanwhile, was completely adrift. Stripped of the protective bubble of his father's power, he was revealed to be little more than a spoiled heir, out of his depth and paralyzed by indecision. He tried calling Anna several times, seeking the familiar comfort of her quiet support. He wanted to complain to her, to have her soothe his bruised ego, but her phone went straight to voicemail every time. "She's probably just being emotional about what Mom said at the party," he muttered to his father, completely misreading the situation. "She'll come around. She always does." Richard barely heard him. He was staring at the latest market report, watching his legacy being systematically dismantled. The E.A. Sterling Foundation had done it. They had secured enough shares. It was over. All that remained was the formal transfer of power. Their lawyers received an official, non-negotiable summons. An emergency board meeting would be held the following Monday. The new majority shareholder would be present to address the board and announce their transition plan. The news landed like a death sentence. This was their last stand, a final humiliating ritual of defeat. They would have to sit in their own boardroom and face the person who had brought them to their knees. That night, the grand Harrington mansion felt less like a castle and more like a tomb. The walls they had built to keep the world out now felt like they were closing in, squeezing the very air from their lungs. They were about to meet their conqueror, and they had no idea that the face of their ruin was one they knew so well. The Harrington Global Boardroom was a chamber of dread. The long obsidian table reflected the grim faces of the board members who sat around it, a collection of the city's most powerful men, now reduced to silent, anxious spectators. At the head of the table, Richard Harrington sat stiffly in his chair, his face a granite mask of suppressed fury. Beside him, Mark fidgeted with his tie, his usual cocksure demeanor completely gone, replaced by the nervous energy of a student waiting for the principal. Cynthia had insisted on being present, perched on a chair against the wall, as if to offer silent, moral support, though her presence only amplified the funereal tension. They were all waiting. The air was thick with the unspoken question, who was E.A. Sterling? The name had become a legend in the financial world in a matter of weeks, a phantom entity that had toppled an institution. They imagined a ruthless corporate raider, a grizzled old money tycoon, or perhaps a consortium of foreign investors. The double doors at the end of the boardroom swung open silently. Two stern-faced individuals in dark suits, lawyers clearly, entered first and stood on either side of the doorway. Then, a figure stepped between them and walked into the room. A collective soft gasp rippled through the boardroom. Richard Harrington's eyes widened in stunned confusion. Cynthia's perfectly painted mouth fell open. And Mark? Mark looked as if he had been struck by lightning. It was Anna. She was not the simple librarian from the soup kitchen. The modest dresses were gone, replaced by a tailored, impeccably cut charcoal gray suit. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, professional chignon, and her librarian-style glasses were perched on her nose, though today they seemed less a sign of meekness and more an instrument of sharp, intellectual focus. She walked with a calm, deliberate confidence that commanded the entire room. She didn't look at Mark. Her gaze was cool, level, and fixed on the head of the table. She stopped at the empty chair opposite Richard, her lawyers taking up positions behind her. For a long moment, the only sound was the frantic, panicked beating of Mark's own heart. He stared at her, his mind struggling to connect the two images. The humble, gentle woman he had so carelessly dismissed, and the powerful, commanding figure who now stood before him. The woman he thought he was molding was the one who had just brought his entire world crashing down. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable, until finally her chief counsel, Mr. Davies, broke it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he said, his voice resonating with authority, "may I present the founder and sole director of the E.A. Sterling Foundation, the new majority shareholder of this corporation, Miss Eleanor Anna Sterling." Anna's eyes swept across the stunned faces in the room before finally landing on Mark. He looked utterly broken, his face a canvas of shock, betrayal, and a dawning, horrifying understanding. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted with the force of an earthquake. "Good morning," Anna said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. It was the same soft voice she used at the library, yet here, in this context, it was imbued with an unshakable authority. She placed a slim portfolio on the table in front of her. She then looked directly at Mark, her expression devoid of malice, yet colder than he had ever seen it. "Mark," she said, her voice clear and precise. From her pocket she produced the 5-carat diamond ring. She didn't throw it. She simply slid it across the vast polished table. It glided silently until it came to a stop directly in front of him. "Our engagement is over." The public, clinical finality of the act was more devastating than any shouting match could have ever been. A low murmur went through the board members. Cynthia let out a small, strangled gasp from her seat against the wall. Anna then turned her attention to Richard, who was staring at her as if she were an apparition. "As of this morning," she continued, addressing the entire room, "the E.A. Sterling Foundation holds a 55% controlling interest in Harrington Global. Sweeping changes are, of course, imminent. But my first official act as the new head of this board is a matter of corporate hygiene." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I am commissioning a full, independent, and forensic audit of this company's entire financial history, effective immediately. We will pay special attention to all expenditures and donations related to a subsidiary entity known as the Harrington Family Charitable Fund." The name hung in the air like a guillotine. Richard Harrington's face went from a furious red to a deathly ashen white. He knew. She knew. She wasn't just taking over the company. She was unearthing their deepest, most criminal secrets. The charitable fund was their personal piggy bank. A complex web of embezzlement and tax fraud. "This is an outrage! A lie!" Cynthia shrieked, jumping to her feet. "You can't! Please have Mrs. Harrington escorted from the room. Anna said calmly to one of her lawyers, without even glancing in Cynthia's direction. As Cynthia was ushered out, still protesting hysterically, Anna's gaze returned to the board. "The future of Harrington Global will be one of transparency, ethical conduct, and genuine social responsibility. Values, I'm afraid, that have been absent from this boardroom for a very long time." She had done it. She had not raised her voice. She had not stooped to their level. She had simply used the truth as a weapon, and in the cold, clear light of that boardroom, it was proving to be the most devastating weapon of all. Mark could only stare at the glittering ring in front of him, a monument to his colossal, life-altering mistake. The fallout was swift and brutal. The forensic audit, led by Mr. Davies's mercilessly efficient team, was less an investigation and more an autopsy. It uncovered years of systematic fraud. The Harrington Family Charitable Fund was exposed in the press for what it was: a slush fund used to finance lavish vacations, pay off personal debts, and purchase luxury cars, all under the guise of philanthropy. The scale of the embezzlement was staggering. Federal investigators, alerted by the findings, descended upon what was left of Harrington Global. Richard and Mark Harrington were arrested not in their opulent offices, but in a pre-dawn raid on their palatial estate. The images of them being led away in handcuffs were on every news channel, a spectacular fall from grace that captivated the city. Their assets were frozen, their friends abandoned them, and their empire was dismantled piece by piece. Cynthia was left alone in a cavernous, empty mansion, facing social and financial ruin. The punishment was absolute. Months later, the soup kitchen was unrecognizable. The peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by warm wood, bright lighting, and a state-of-the-art kitchen. A new, professionally printed sign hung over the entrance: the Sterling Hope Center. Inside, Anna, dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a comfortable sweater, stood beside Maria, ladling soup into bowls. Her work was no longer a secret, but she had refused to let it change her. The foundation had expanded its operations, funding schools, shelters, and clinics across the country, but this center remained her heart. It was her ground zero for what truly mattered. "It's still hard to believe," Maria said, shaking her head in wonder as she looked around the bustling, cheerful dining room. "You're a real-life superhero, Anna." Anna smiled, a genuine, peaceful expression. "My parents were the heroes," she said softly. "I'm just trying to honor their legacy." On a television mounted in the corner of the room, a news anchor was giving an update on the Harrington trial. Anna glanced at it for a moment, her face unreadable. She felt no thrill of victory, no bitter satisfaction. There was only a quiet sense of equilibrium, of a debt having been paid and a balance restored. She had used her power not for vengeance, but for justice, turning the ill-gotten gains of a corrupt family into a force for good. Handing a warm bowl to a young mother with a child, Anna received a thankful smile that was worth more than the entire Harrington fortune. Here, in this place of simple kindness, she was not the head of a foundation or a corporate titan. She was just Anna. And for the first time in a very long time, her two worlds were finally one.